You know that feeling, right? That absolute dread when you step on a squishy carpet or you see a dark stain creeping across the ceiling. Water damage, man, it hits fast. It's messy, it's chaotic, and it can seriously turn your world upside down. But there is a way to bring order back from all that chaos, and that's exactly what we're going to break down step by step.
So just picture it for a second. It's the middle of the night. You hear that sound, that unmistakable sound of running water, but everything's supposed to be off. Your heart starts pounding. That panic starts to creep in. I'm telling you, what you do in that first hour can make the difference between a little problem and a full-blown catastrophe. So, what are the next steps? All right, let's dive right in.
Okay, so before we can even talk about fixing the problem, you gotta know your enemy. Water damage is sneaky. It often starts behind the scenes, from sources that are totally hidden inside the bones of our homes. Let's take a look at the usual suspects.
Yeah, the list is pretty long. You've got those really quiet, slow-moving problems, like a leak in your foundation that you might not even notice for weeks. And then, bam, you've got the sudden disasters, the water heater that just gives up, or a washing machine hose that bursts and floods an entire room in minutes. And, if you're in an older home, that aging plumbing, it's like a ticking time bomb.
This quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. The single biggest thing you need to know about water damage is its speed. It does not stop. It just keeps seeping and spreading and soaking into everything it touches. And that means our response has to be just as fast, if not faster.
And here it is. This is the deadline that nature gives you. This is so crucial. In just 1 or 2 days, what was a simple water leak can turn into a serious mold issue. Mold just loves to grow on wet drywall and insulation. So this 48-hour window, it's the reason everything we're about to talk about happens with such incredible urgency. The clock is literally ticking.
And that ticking clock brings us to what is, without a doubt, the most important phase of this whole thing, the immediate response. What a professional team does in the first 60 minutes after they show up. Well, that can pretty much determine how the rest of this story goes. This isn't about cleaning up. This is about full-on damage control.
A real professional response is like watching a whirlwind of perfectly controlled action. First things first, they find the leak and they stop it. Then they bring in the big guns, these huge truck-mounted extractors, to pull out all of that standing water. Right after that, they'll start tearing out anything that's too soaked to be saved, like carpet padding. And finally, the drying equipment gets set up to start fighting the moisture that you can't even see.
So this whole emergency phase, it has a name. It's called mitigation. Honestly, the best way to think about it is like an emergency room for your house. The goal right now isn't to make it look pretty again. The goal is to stabilize the patient, to stop the bleeding, or in this case, the water, and just prevent the situation from getting any worse.
Getting rid of the puddles on the floor, that's actually just the beginning. The real fight is against the moisture that's trapped deep down inside your walls, your floors, and your ceilings. And this next phase, it's not about muscle. It's all about science.
And this is where the serious tech comes into play. We are not talking about a couple of fans you'd buy at the hardware store. We're talking commercial-grade dehumidifiers that can pull something like 150 pints of water out of the air in a single day. We're talking thermal cameras that can literally see cold, wet spots inside your walls, and super precise moisture meters that tell them exactly how wet the structure still is.
And remember that science I mentioned? Well, here it is. It's a field called psychrometry. Sounds complicated, right? But all it is the science of moist air. Technicians use it to figure out the perfect balance of temperature, humidity, and airflow. It lets them create the absolute ideal drying environment. It's not guesswork. It's a very precise, calculated process.
So how long does this whole science experiment take? Well, for most jobs in a house, you can probably expect to have all that professional drying equipment running full blast for about 3 to 5 days, 24/7. That's usually enough time for all those building materials to finally let go of all that trapped moisture.
All right, so once the structure is officially and verifiably dry, the final phase can kick off. The emergency is over. The science has done its part. Now it's time to actually rebuild and make your house feel like your home again.
It's so important to get the difference between these two words, remediation or mitigation. That's the triage. It's stopping the damage. Restoration, that's the surgery. That's rebuilding everything that was lost. So if your kitchen floods, it first needs remediation to get the water out and dry everything. Then it needs restoration to put in new cabinets, new floors, and repaint the walls. See the difference?
And at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. After all the chaos, the noise from the fans, and the disruption,
The goal is really simple. Make it look like it never, ever happened.
Of course, there's a huge question on everyone's mind through all this, and it's, what on earth is this going to cost me? So let's talk about the financial side of things. Because, let's be honest, it can be just as confusing as the technical stuff.
For a pretty typical water damage situation in a home, you can probably expect the cost to land somewhere in this ballpark. A small contained leak is going to be on that lower end. A major disaster that hits multiple rooms, that's going to be on the higher end. The biggest factors are really how big the affected area is and how long the water was just sitting there before the pros got there.
So the big question, what will your insurance actually pay for? Well, it usually comes down to one really important distinction, and this table lays it out perfectly. Was the damage sudden and accidental, or was it gradual and preventable? So, a pipe that just bursts out of nowhere, that's usually covered. But that tiny leak under your sink that you kind of ignored for 6 months? Yeah, probably not. And it is so critical to know this. Standard policies do not cover flooding that comes from outside your house. For that, you need a totally separate flood policy.
The professionals, they can put back the walls and the floors. They can return your property to its pre-loss condition. But that feeling of security, that sense of comfort in your own space, that can take a little longer to come back. The physical restoration, that's a science. But the emotional restoration, well, that's a much more personal journey. And really, that's often the very last step to making a house really feel like home again.